Okay. So I see that we are let me check. Should we wait for the others, or shall we start now?
I know that Ricard has a conflict and cannot attend this meeting, unfortunately.
Okay. So maybe so let's see, how can I share my computer? Settings, notification, show hands, presentation view. God, review. I'd like to see the note-taking tool. Is that possible to share the screen?
So on the notes, it's just easier if you follow the link I've just pasted in the chat as a
Okay,
shortcut.
right. Okay.
If you want to share your screen, you have to look at the top left.
Oh, yeah.
It's the
That's okay.
third icon.
Yeah. I got it. Great. So you have my screen now, and I'm going to move here. The not well. So can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess you're all aware of the not well. And we can probably move directly to the meat of the meeting. So we have currently 4 drafts. And I think these are the drafts we want to discuss today. I'm wondering if Signem, you want to start, or do we have any preferred order?
I don't mind starting.
Okay, go ahead.
Mm.
So maybe I can try to share your meeting material. Okay.
The first one.
The first one. Here we go. Good.
Okay, we can go directly to the second slide. I, as promised, brought this back from expiration, and it's now at version 5. It has progressed more slowly than I imagined, but I finally aligned the document better with the current GroupCom, and also had a look at GroupCom OSCOR to have a few ideas of how to meet the requirements of GroupCom, which are 30 mandatory requirements and 15 optional requirements, which were not previously thought in the previous versions of the document. And in the previous versions of the document, it only considered authorization to 2 ASs. We changed that, if you remember, to a single AS with 2 audiences. And it only handled join requests and responses and protecting the pub-sub communication. Now the document has expanded to be to meet the GroupCom requirements. So we talk about more about the KDC interface, the resources hosted, operations permitted on those resources for the different roles, which are namely the publisher and subscriber. And the group operation discussions, the subsections have expanded to include querying for group information, updating authentication credentials, removal from the group, and rekeying the group. So we have discussions around this. Currently, I've selected the very basic default mechanisms that were suggested already in the GroupCom for these. But in the next slide, I also ask for maybe more considerations need to be added to expand on these group operations. Let me not switch yet. Let me talk a little bit about slide 2. So in addition, I've also defined a scope, the AIF format, similar to the OSCORE one. It's called AIF PubSub Group Com. It describes how the scope should be formatted with two roles, publisher and subscriber. So it's very similar to the OSCORE document in that case, the scope change. So those were the changes introduced. The other major change is I have moved the focus away from MQTT because as the GroupCom document has expanded to include additional operations, and some of those things that were not previously considered is now added to the document, I start to question whether how relevant or how applicable this document to a MQTT application in practice. Just to give an example, for instance, to rekey a group, you need to be able to send from KDC and some communication to the clients regarding the key changes. And this is not clear how it will be done unless the MQTT client supports all the time co-app communications at the same time. So having these multitude of protocols, HTTP to do the MQTT TLS profile, co-app to talk to the KDC, and then the MQTT to do the PubSub communication, it seemed like there was no justification for that kind of a client. That's why I've removed the focus to the end, sketched a solution how this could be still done for MQTT, but I wonder whether MQTT should be just omitted from this draft altogether. So that's the first question to the working group. Next slide, please.
So let me start to rephrase. Is the problem that too many protocols have to be implemented by for a MQTT client? Is the problem that you need too many layers for the standard MQTT client?
It's just that the co-app PubSub is a way of doing PubSub communication for a different type of protocol, and MQTT is exactly doing the same PubSub communication for using a different protocol. It's just that if things are implemented in MQTT, you would imagine that it stays in the MQTT ecosystem. And then the HTTP was able to be justified because you would say, we didn't expect clients to do HTTP. We expected them to be onboarded somehow at the beginning with MQTT TLS profile. And it was the resource server that was supposed to do a little bit HTTP. And that was kind of acceptable because of the current applications of MQTT allow that kind of plugins to the resource server or the broker, MQTT broker. So there were already examples of that in the in practice. Now we don't have examples of mixed co-app MQTT clients or any applications to that end. And I personally didn't know how to justify that kind of combination of protocols to be able to do the co-app communication with the KDC. That's why I'm questioning how applicable this draft will be to MQTT. And that's why I pushed the emphasis to the end, just a sketch. So the draft 100% focuses on co-app at the moment, and still has questions to resolve, even with co-app. And then MQTT just adds another layer of complexity to the draft at the PubSub draft. And I don't know if it is going to be a practicable solution.
Okay. Do you want the other to give their opinion on that?
Sure.
So the question would be whether the draft should be only focused on co-app, or I mean, basically include MQTT or not.
Now, there's a line in the sentence in the, yes, that's the question, just to say to people, there's a sentence in the draft which said, oh, you can use other PubSub protocols and etc. But even when you try to sketch the solution for MQTT, I would say it would require another profile rather than being squeezed into the PubSub profile. That's the only comment. Yeah, I'm happy to have feedback on this.
Yeah, Mako, do you have any?
What Sigdem said basically, I think it's better for once to focus on on co-op, at least at the moment, just ensuring to not prevent any alternative versions focused on MQTT. And yes, separate document sounds better to take that kind of effort. So I support focusing on co-op for now.
Goran, I guess it's on you. Do you
Yeah,
have
I
any
have the
opinion
same.
on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
I just agree with what's been said here. I think that makes sense. I actually had a question just about perhaps this is, I haven't read the draft in a long time, so perhaps this is answered already. But the dependence on the co-op pub sub draft, that's still a draft, and I don't know, I don't remember really the state of that draft. Is there some sensitivity there in design choices in the pub sub draft that will have impact on this draft?
I think we have to keep an eye on this, definitely. Definitely. So, when I first agreed to participate in the draft, I was thinking my role was on the MQTT parts, but now, and the pub sub parts more or less were established. But and the role has changed. I've been adding more and trying to understand how co-op pops up works, and that was another question. I think either Francesca needs to actively come back to the draft to be able to answer these questions, and justify some of the choices that have been earlier, which is the topic of my slide 3. There are some earlier even choices from even the security end that needs to be reconsidered, and if there are changes to the co-op pub sub, I think they need to be also addressed back in this document if what we're saying no more holds. So short answer, Garan, I don't know, but
Yeah, no, it's
definitely
fine.
needs to be checked.
Thanks. Maybe we should ask the chairs of core working group here what's the status of the co-op pub sub or the plans.
The authors are trying to revive it, and there was a revamp, literally, a few weeks ago, I think, and it's mostly on Jaime's ends to progress that. And as far as I know, he had a to-do quite detailed to follow. But yeah, when I remind about that, I also put that in context of this ACE document, so that one doesn't block the other eventually.
Okay. Thanks.
But what I'm hearing from Sigdem is that she's looking for additional resource.
Yeah, I do definitely need a little bit of help because I feel like I'm making decisions on my own, which needs to be, I think, and needs a bigger, wider working group consensus, as well as a person who's much more familiar with co-op pops up. And maybe slide 3 will explain some of the questions that I'm trying to answer. So there are a number of to-dos. What I have done is I've gone through the GroupCom mandatory and optional requirements and tried to answer as many questions as possible, especially also following the OSCOR lead, looking at how that draft answered those questions. And also taken into account Marco's earlier review on this, and even the late Jim Shaw, who reviewed and put certain questions which were not still answered on this document. So one of these, there are various different things that the document tries to be flexible at the moment, and therefore has to, due to that flexibility, has to put even more considerations into how things need to be handled. The first one is the token transfer method. The draft says you can either use OSCOR or DTLS profile to do the transport, like ACE transport. So, and then the token transfer method the draft describes at the moment is using the endpoint for token transport, but it also accepts that in the DTLS profile, you could use other methods during the TLS handshake, DTLS handshake. Now, if that's the case, there should be a method to do the KDC challenge from the KDC, communicated somehow. And OSCOR describes a method, and we need to also decide on a method for that if we are to keep that flexibility of how the token is transported. There are, I kind of said we host almost all the resources at the moment that the GroupCom defines, except the policies, because I wasn't too sure what that policies resource could hold for PubSub group communication. And then that could be brought back. But then we need to think about what those policies resource look like for PubSub. And then there are lots of different things that need to be clarified due to the write-up being based on older documents, especially for the authentication credential descriptions, as well as the protection of the PubSub communication. There were outstanding questions regarding those already, and then the documents referred to got older. Now we need to refer to the newer documents for the signature algorithms, as well as the structure of the COSE object, and talk about the acceptable authentication credentials much more clearly. Previously, these were all COSE keys, and I updated it to be a list of things, including CBOR web tokens and etc., following the OSCOR lead, the GroupCom OSCOR lead. But then I would like to know, in a PubSub CoAP setting, what is the expectation on these algorithms? And that's definitely would be helpful if there was another person to give commentary on this. There were also questions about protecting the group communication for the group key generation. The way that it's described in the document at the moment doesn't seem to be entirely correct, because of how the base IV is sent to the group members by the KDC, and how the partial IV is generated by the group members. It seems underdefined. There seems to be some details missing there. And then at the moment, for instance, group rekeying, I defaulted to point-to-point, which is the GroupCom's recommendation. But then one could easily imagine it would be much nicer to have KDC being involved in group rekeying through the PubSub communication, for instance, and having a rekeying topic that the group members register to, and KDC publishes new keying material there, and it's group rekeying, and that needs to be, again, defined. At the moment, the document responds to a number of GroupCom requirements, or leaves them as to do, and that's clearly marked. But we do definitely need to go through and clearly say, for each of those 30 mandatory requirements, how do we answer them? And that's still missing. So in summary, I've done a number of additions to the draft to make it closer to GroupCom requirements, but there requires at least one or two iterations to make sure that it answers all the mandatory requirements at least, and then it might leave optional requirements as they are, but there needs to be definitely and more work to be done on this draft. So I don't think it would be ready for the last call that, as you were imagining by the deadline that you had in mind, Daniel. So that's my summary. It doesn't, it's not a very rosy summary, but there are a huge number of things that need to be clarified in the draft based on its current write-up.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And I feel like I need to definitely either sit down with Francesca or somebody who knows the PubSub CoAP a little bit more than I do in terms of what's the acceptable algorithms and authentication credentials and etc. For that type of communication model.
Okay, right. So I think that's the major takeout. So the first thing is that who in the working group could address those questions and could help Signam.
So I'm not sure if anybody is actually watching the queue. It seems to me that this is a flexible protocol, as you said, and it needs some other protocols to do part of the work for that. And you're running into this problem in two places. One is where you have this weird combination of MQTT, HTTP, and COAP. And maybe we can understand that a little bit better, and find out whether we really need all three of them. And the other one is that you need to make sure that the updated GroupCom documents actually do what you need, or how to parameterize them so that they do what you need. And to me, it sounds a lot like this needs kind of an architecture plus profile approach. So the interface between the GroupCom keying here and or the PubSub keying and the various transfer methods and so on employed is well defined. So it becomes easy to say, oh, for DTLS, we put this here and that there, and we are done. And I'm wondering if that could simplify the work here, because the PubSub authorization mechanism itself would simply say, oh, I need a way to redistribute changed key, and then a profile would say, yeah, we can do this using the PubSub mechanism, or we can use this using CoAP group communication, or we have another way of doing this. So I think that would make it easier for me actually to make more reasonable contributions to the work, instead of looking at it as one big thing, looking at it as two parts that have a well-defined interface.
Yes. So I'm not too sure if you've were at the beginning of the meeting. We were thinking of removing MQTT from the draft anyway, thinking that it's the combination of the protocols is too much to expect on a MQTT client to speak CoAP at the same time to manage the KDC. So, and whether it was practicable. And that's why I suggested to remove MQTT anyway.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like that suggestion too much. I mean, it sure simplifies the document, so that's a good thing. But having another base protocol or transfer protocol in there would make sure that this architecture plus profile approach actually is exercised, and we do it in more than one way. So I think the MQTT mechanism would actually be good. And what we would need to do here is make sure we do this in a way that actually makes sense. So I'm not entirely sure why we need three protocols here. I mean, I know the difference between MQTT-like protocols and REST-like protocols, but why do we need HTTP and
Oh, okay. Sorry, I should have been clear. So the MQTT, because the document assumes that the underlying communication between the AS and the RS is somehow secured by a ACE transport profile, and the only one that is existing for MQTT at the moment is MQTT TLS profile, which uses HTTP. That's why it became three protocols. Because we have to assume somehow the client is able to talk to the AS, and then the client is able to talk to the RS, the broker, with some kind of an ACE transport profile. And the only one that exists at the moment is the MQTT TLS profile, which kind of ties them to that HTTP TLS plus ACE related stuff, and then MQTT for the PubSub communication. And then on top of this, to secure the PubSub communication, to encrypt the content, the payload, we have to get the KDC architecture, the PubSub architecture that is described here, and then the KDC is only supporting CoAP. So that now the MQTT client needs to be able to get tokens using the MQTT TLS profile, and then it needs to approach the KDC using CoAP, and then it needs to approach the broker using MQTT.
Yeah, so I definitely don't know these protocols well enough to make a reasonable suggestion. But I, in my naivety, I would have thought that CoAP and HTTP are essentially equivalent. So why do you ever need both?
Then we would have to have the MQTT TLS profile changed to support the thing over CoAP as well, right? Because that profile doesn't include. Well, it does say you can, if you want, to use CoAP and the equivalent, but the entire thing was described over HTTP TLS combination.
Yeah, another way is to run CoAP over MQTT.
I haven't considered that.
And that's actually the one that my brain delivers first when I start to think about this.
Okay.
So any communication with the KDC would be over MQTT in that model with CoAP on top of it.
Okay, but would
that,
my understanding was that we didn't want to go into the discussion of KDC supporting any other protocol than CoAP.
okay. Yeah, if that is a constraint, then yes.
Yeah, I took it as from a GroupCom KDC type, because we kind of rely all the GroupCom definitions of KDC and how it hosts the CoAP resources and what operations it permits on it. Yeah, I mean, so I completely agree that a solution can be found. That's why I kept the sketch there. But then I noticed that sketch, to be anything useful for MQTT, would have to answer a number of questions for rekeying, especially. And it felt like a bit hand wavy to describe it over 3 protocols, just to make it fit. So I wouldn't close the door to MQTT, but I feel like it would almost waste down the document, basically. Previously, I was thinking that there would be enough common methods to describe, and then you would have a CoAP section describing how, using these common approaches, you construct the solution for CoAP, and then if you take this and change a bit of this, you would do that for MQTT. It ended up not being so that way. It ended up like writing 2 different documents, and that's why I said, let's take a step back from MQTT now, because I don't even know how to answer some of the questions for CoAP. And the CoAP help that I was asking for is mostly about probably a second eye, and it could be resolved with a review on another review. It doesn't, I'm definitely happy to have other co-authors on this, but more on reviewing the selection of the key algorithms as well as authentication credentials to be future-proof as they are selected. The previous version of the draft was not future-proof, and there were a number of questions raised about key construction. And then kind of wrote it up similar to the GroupCom OSCORE, but then the key construction, group key construction there uses a very OSCORE specific solution. And I do not think that directly applies to the PubSub CoAP. So something needs to be fixed in specifically how the group keys are constructed in the draft. So that's, I think, the major mandatory requirement that needs to be addressed. Other questions I'm raising are more or less optional. Like, we do have a default working solution described in the draft. But since we are trying to be flexible in terms of token transfer methods, etc., or it would be a good addition if we had a group rekeying, for instance, even though we do have a default solution described in the draft. So all of these are nice to have, but the main issue that needs to be resolved is a review on the authentication credentials to be used by the publishers, as well as the group rekeying, the group key approach that secures the PubSub communication. So those are the two things that I need maybe another pair of eyes on.
Okay, I'm wondering whether this can be done in a way that somebody could write that MQTT document later on,
Yeah.
and use the user-defined interface.
Yeah, I think the MQTT sketch at the moment is more or less following the COAP for getting the authorization. It is more or less there is a solution for this, and then for the KDC to get to send the join requests and response to the groups, there could be a sketch on this as well. The group communication or the PubSub communication is going to be over MQTT. How that is protected, that could be also described. The group rekeying approach, the one-to-one communication that is necessary that should be initiated from KDC to the MQTT client, that's not very clear. So that is the part where there is a struggle, and that's the part that needs to be resolved, basically.
Okay. Yeah, so we are looking for someone who could join this work.
Yeah, so once this pops up, I think is cleanly written, it would have been an easier, or not an easier, but I think less uncertain way to deal with the MQTT as well. And happy to follow it up on a separate profile, building on the PubSub, even referring to that a lot, and just explaining the differences with MQTT. But I would rather have the CoAP PubSub cleanly describe how it implements the group com, basically.
Yep. Got it.
Yeah, and so who do we think can help Signum in the working group?
Well, just jump into the mic. I think I can assist, especially on the key usage and hopefully update and in the alignment with key group com overall. Well, I reviewed the document before. I plan to do it again. I think you prefer to wait for yet another revision for an actual review. That's my guess, at least. But in general, I can help out Signum.
Yes, thank you, Marco. I would like to push another update, but maybe I'll send you an email to ask for your feedback on the choices that I am going to be putting in that revision, and whether that makes sense based on your involvement with Core PubSub, as well as your because you've done the OSCORE one for GroupCom, so
right.
Compared to that, whether that's kind of an acceptable choice.
We may take Focus Telco in January, if it works for you. At least we work on this in sync.
Yeah. Okay.
I have two quick comments on the slides you show. First, on the first point on slide 3. If I understand correctly, the point you're raising there, it's probably about doing the need to define the method for KC challenge just the way it is done in KeyGroupCom OSCORE. Because KeyGroupCom just say, if you do something strange that deviates from this norm, well, you have to define a way to circulate a challenge. And KeyGroupCom OSCORE considers the particular case from the DTLS profile and defines the challenge in that case. So probably you may want to go for just the same thing, really.
I thought about this. Yes, I've read it through. I thought about this. I left it because I wanted to check. So I think what I have struggled with is that there were certain choices or default paths that were chosen by Francesca when she started out the document, and I wasn't too sure how serious we were to offer those options of other flexible paths and etc., and whether there was a there was a kind of a strong opinion to include those other options or not. So yes, I completely agree with you. If we were to provide the other DTLS profile token transfer methods, then the one that you describe in GroupCom Oscar is definitely can just be taken and put into this draft as well, or referred to, yes. If I don't, I don't need to rewrite it. I can just refer it to the GroupCom Oscar and say implement it that way, basically.
Good. Now, the other point was at the end of the previous slide, when you say you define the AF data model. Yeah, I think you should additionally register a co-op content format. And if you check GroupCom Oscar, that happened there. And
yes.
And so that's a good thing to do anyway. But building on that, you may want to consider an additional optional feature that is defined in GroupCom in the first place, and then it is specialized in GroupCom OSCORE. It's about the optional tagging of the scope claim in the access token to signal its semantics. And thanks to the existence of the file magic RFC, I don't remember the exact number out of my head, you don't actually need to manually register a new CBOR tag. You have one automatically registered from the content format you have registered.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you check GroupCom OSCORE, all this is done there, specialized for that profile. Something similar makes sense here too, I think.
Okay. Will do. I mean, I noted a number of things in the GroupCom OSCORE document that we should be doing similarly. Yeah, but I try to address the most important ones as I've seen, but this makes it, I'll add it to the to-do list for the CBOR tag registration as well. Yeah.
The content format.
Content format, sorry.
Yeah, and that will automatically result in a tag registration that you may want to use for other things.
Okay. Noted. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, that's all I had. Thanks.
Okay. So no more comments. So we have a plan to move forward, but my understanding is that we're just making one step. We don't really know how to completely finish the document now, and we are still looking for additional resource. Am I correct?
I mean, no, I think it's fine. I do have, for each of the questions I raised, I do have possible solutions. And if Marco, and if I kind of work with Marco and then have him review those things, that should be fine.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, it's the one question of things like certain resources that are to be hosted. As I said, I kind of said KDC hosts almost all the resources except the policies related one. It would be good to have a little bit insight on to COAP PubSub and the security expectations on applications using COAP PubSub and what kind of policies need to be hosted. That's the part where I would definitely need more input, as I do not have as much experience or examples as I do for MQTT, for instance, for the COAP PubSub, what policies could look like. That needs to be hosted at KDC. So I don't want to omit things just because I lack the example. And there might be other people who could provide the examples.
Okay. Okay, right. So let's start where we are, where we can head and see
Mm-hmm.
how we can move. Which are the co-author of that working of that document?
The first slide, Francesca. It's the...
Okay, but that's only you and Francesca
Yes.
currently.
I mean,
Okay.
definitely, if I don't think neither Francesca nor I mind if there is other people who would like to join the co-author list. I mean, with Marco's reviews, we can definitely add him as a co-author because he's made such useful suggestions already. You know, with his reviews already, which some of which were addressed and recorded in GitHub.
Okay. So that, I mean, you deal with Marco, but if we need to find out additional resources, please let me know, and
Okay.
just to make sure the document can be moved forward softly.
Yes.
So
Okay, right.
one way to fold in more people would be to announce a design team meeting. So Marco and you and hopefully Francesca would be part of that meeting, but other people could also be part of that meeting and also make their suggestions. I don't know if this is helping or hurting, but I would at least propose considering it.
Okay. Excellent.
Yeah, it might be helpful. Okay, right. So next slides. I think it's Marco. Which one do you want first? Probably the group com.
Yes, exactly. That was not in the agenda you proposed already, but I think it was good to brief a few recent points that happened around these two drafts, but it's pretty short. Next slide, please, already.
Oops.
Oh, magic.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, this is what I have on Key.com. It's still an AD review, of course, and there were no changes since the latest version produced in September. Just to mention that we had a discussion about a very particular point here during the September interim with SIGDEM, and the two of us followed up with a private exchange, and that resulted in me creating a GitHub issue, which is still there, proposing new text for a particular paragraph. And the idea was basically to relax the requirements on the inclusion of one parameter in the joining response from the KDC. It has always been a must because we couldn't imagine reason to really omit it. But SIGDEM brought up a good reason for the pub/sub profile, where having that parameter wouldn't hurt functionality, but it'd be suboptimal in terms of performance. So if you check the issue, there is a new alternative text, changing the must to a should, and adding a sentence clarifying good cases where it should still be included and under which prerequisites. So the issue is there. Now, my proposal would be to not rush implementing the issue in the document and submitting yet another revision, just to not confuse Paul, and instead wait for the AD review, and when it comes, I can very easily address this point and that new text as part of the AD review addressing, unless this is very urgent, but yeah, I don't think so. And for consistency, of course, a sentence in Key.com score will need to be updated to state explicitly that in that case, that parameter must be included. But yeah, that can also happen later on when the change in Key.com happens in the first place. So is it okay to wait for addressing this issue in the draft?
Yeah, to my perspective, you can wait or simply push it, and or ask Paul if he's fine. Just you pushing it, but either way are fine for me.
Yeah, then I'll take it when I get Paul's review, and it will be part of the processing. It's not urgent anyway. Okay, but at least the issue with proposed text is there. Thank you. Yeah, on Key.com Oscar, it's in waiting for Shepard write-up, and Ricard accepted to shepherd this document. He's on it already, both with the review and the write-up. I've had another look at the document myself, found a few needs to fix. And this big part here with that figure is actually something that Karsten noted one day where we were working on totally different things. There's a mistake in that example, and the map keys within the blue frame are supposed to be noted with double quotes, not with single quotes. So that's just something wrong to be fixed. Well, after that fix, of course, we would need to still convey the message that only temporarily until publication, for convenience, we indicate those map keys a text string, while the final intention is to have them using the CBOR integer abbreviation. So I digged into older documents and noted, for example, that the OSCOR profile before it was published as an RFC until the last version of its draft had that kind of sentence in the terminology section, and we can add something like that in this document too. Yeah, I can totally address these points, including this last one, when processing the Shepherd review, of course, so that we produce a version that can be submitted with this fixed. Would be that okay? I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what's next? We need to wait for the Shepherd review, and we'll have a version 16 submitted, addressing whatever comments and those needs that I mentioned before. And just to be sure this is not forgotten, I'm fine whatever the decision is just not my decision. Earlier this year, Francesca suggested that this ACE document was sent to the ISG for the ISG convenience, together with two other core documents. So the exact way to implement this may be open to interpretation about the chairs pushing the request publication button or a responsible AD holding on the earliest come documents. I don't know. But I just wanted to raise this up, and probably it's good anyway if the ACE and core chairs sync on this before proceeding. I have the feeling that this ACE document would be the first one of the three really ready with its next version.
Yeah, so just to think to make sure we're in sync. What I think the co-chairs are Karsten and you.
And Jaime. So of
and
course
Jaime. Okay.
I stay out of this as I'm involved in all three documents.
Okay, but so then Karsten, how do you see the synced? Because to me, I'd like to know. I am expecting to ship it to the AD and say he has to sync with the other document. Is it a good way to do, or do you prefer any other?
Well, my working group chair view is somewhere buried in my head, so I would have to look these two documents and their current status up again. But yes, indeed, these could be shipped to the AD with Shepard comment that these are meant to be clustered with the two other documents which are coming out. Well, not next week, but in reasonable time.
Okay, so in any case, I will CC the core chairs to keep them aware of what we're doing. And
But we have different ADs. So
yeah,
one thing that is occasionally done in cases like this is that an AD of a different area of one of the two areas takes over the whole cluster. So we have a common view on this.
mm-hmm.
So this is at least something that should be mentioned as a possibility. So I don't want to push anyone doing it this way, but it has turned out to be beneficial to do that in past cases.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, what I see is that when so at the time we will have addressed the Shepherd review. I will try to ping the two ADs and the multiple working group chairs. And in my case, I have no opinion on who ADs should take that over. And I think if we are the first to be ready, it's going to be on the shoulders of the core chairs to say when the full cluster is ready.
Right.
So, okay. So we have a way to proceed.
So the first thing would be to send a heads up to the two ADs that this cluster is heading towards them, and it would be good to think about a good way to handle it.
Okay, right. The draft being those 3 ones.
Yes.
And the one. Okay. Okay, right. Perfect. We'll do so.
Thank you.
Okay.
That's all I had on that.
So notification token. I think you have to make a choice, maybe.
Yeah, that one, and it's shorter and simpler. Definitely, and I'll try to be quick. Yes, an update on revoke token notification. Next slide, please. To recap, this is addressing the case that was not addressed before, where tokens can be revoked before they reach their natural expiration for a number of reasons, and there was no way or easy way for the interested parties to learn about that. The best thing around was introspection that is limited to the resource server with a number of limitations. So here we are defining essentially an interface at the authorization server that both client and resource server can use to learn about revoked but not yet expired access tokens pertaining them, issuing a GET to a dedicated resource at the authorization server, or more conveniently, observing it to obtain automatic notifications. And this is not intended to be a replacement for introspection, but it complements it nicely, and there's no need for new resources or endpoints at the client and resource server. Next slide, please. Yeah, I showed this before, but this is now aligned with latest updates we've also made. This can be used with 2 modes of operation. The first one has to be supported by the AES, and it allows a client or a resource server to really obtain the full list of revoked access tokens pertaining to that client or resource server. While the second mode of operation, diff query, allows a client or resource server to obtain a list of updates that were made to that token revocation list, or the pertaining portion of that list for that client or resource server. And the diff query mode, in turn, can be used with a further additional and optional cursor extension, such that the list of updates to retrieve does not necessarily consist in the most recent updates occurred, but the client or resource server can fetch the latest update starting from a specified resumption point through cursor. And that was the result of nice discussion we had back then with Ben Kaduk. Used to be a third query mode of its own. We concluded that it's really an extension of the second one. Okay, next slide, please. And I think a lot happened since March in Vienna when we presented the draft for the last time. We had 2 more revisions since then, also thanks to yet another review we received from Marco Rasori. Next slide, please. And just to summarize what happened during the revision, yeah, the use of the cursor from a third mode of its own became an extension of the second diff query mode, and the content concerning it was moved up to the document body, although it required spreading different parts of that content into a different section. And as also discussed in Vienna, actually, we concluded that even if a little less efficient, it's way easier to understand and to implement to have all the messages from the authorization server, or at least from that resource, to have a CBOR map as payload. So that, of course, produced a number of additional cases and corner cases to handle that we did. And I also wanted to mention that some editorial fixes included also suggestions and the PR from David Navarro that also contributed. Next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, for the London meeting, we actually produced yet another revision, considering also the review from Marco. and we further improved the possible use of the cursor extension in order to admit a wrap around of the index used as practical cursor that was not supported yet. Now it is, so in principle this pattern can go on forever, just nicely handled in case of wraparound. That of course require to introduce some more constants and internal parameters to the AES to keep track of that and manage that correctly. On top of that, just clarifications. Next slide, please. So what's left? We definitely still need to add example of message exchanges where the query mode is used also with the cursor extension. I noted when I submitted the revision for London that there are now a number of parameters and constants specified in the document just in line at some point the first time they are needed, but it can become difficult to keep all of them in the reader mind cache. So I was planning an additional appendix where they are all put together and overviewed, and the relation with one another, if any, is stressed. And I also had a number of security considerations in mind that are not discussed yet in the related sections, and I plan to add. So our goal for the Yokohama meeting would be to try to address all these points for a new revision 4. And if we manage, and I think so, and if no more open points and issues come up, we may actually have a version 4 eligible for a working group last call. I'm confident.
Okay, good. So no major point to be discussed, as I see. So we can move to the next document. You have 2 minutes. Do you think?
Sorry, I actually had a question. I actually had a question on, but maybe this we can take this offline. But I had a question about the group comp proxy draft. Isn't that also related to the cluster? Isn't that the same cluster? Or is that?
Well, it's not the document that Francesca mentioned in that context.
No, that's right. But
no,
I thought it was sort of, we need to have that in order to complete the core group com draft, right?
So do we just need it to complete the thing, or is it actually a prerequisite to have for writing it? I mean, does it round out the cluster, or is it really dependent?
I don't think it depends on it.
Okay, so it's maybe the
if
other
you want
way.
it's a considerable extension to group base, but I don't think it builds a dependency to be related to this set of documents. Okay. Personally,
just checking.
Thanks.
Because it's way behind. That's why I was thinking that.
Right.
and that's my fault.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't think we have time to go through that presentation.
If it works for you, Daniel, we can resume from here in the January meeting, and of course, it's not that we wait for that to work on this, but
yeah,
this requires more time.
yeah, that's one thing. So okay, right. So we can do that, and also you can use the mailing list if you want to raise some issues. So I think what the point I see is that we're trying to make progress on the pub sub, and I'm pretty confident that we can make quite. I don't see anything that should prevent us to have a working group last call for the token draft. So maybe this one is should be discussed a little bit more during the next interim meeting. EDOC, maybe Goran, you want to say something on EDOC?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're over time now, and I need to leave for another meeting. So maybe we can bring that up also in the next meeting.
Okay, right. Okay. So thank you for attending this meeting, and see you next interim meeting.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.